This is Rock Our World. I haven't told you for a while what Rock Our World is referring to. It's referring to Daniel 2, when this rock, who is Jesus Christ, comes out of outer space and smashes the statue, which is Babylon, on the feet and destroys it. And that, in essence, is a picture of the tribulation. That's what happens. That's the final outcome of the 50-year tribulation. Yeshua wins the battle. He is the warrior, and he stands with all of the firstfruits. He is the first of the firstfruits. So I've had some things become crystal clear in my mind, and of course this is me speaking, this is my opinion, but I'm on a journey, and so are you, all of you. We're in the time of the restoration of all things, and things are becoming clearer and clearer, more clear. So I'm going to tackle a couple of projects here. I better make it two episodes, but I'm going to tackle the calendar of God. Now, I've spoken about this a lot, but I have made a lot of mistakes every time I do it, or different mistakes, and come back and correct them. Of course, in the 2 years I've been doing these, things have become a lot more clear. So I'm going to take a shot at describing the calendar of God, the most clear I've done so far. And what I'm finding is I point people back to 10 different episodes to get the gist of the calendars, and I'm thinking, boy, if I could get it all in one, that would be a little more efficient use of time. But I do want people to watch all the episodes. I just went back and watched episode 7. I was trying to clean up some things and figure out some things, and I realized I was saying something in episode 7. I made this statement that the army of God and the bride of Christ are the same thing, and in the 2 years since then, I realized they're not. One is part of the other, but the army of God is the 144,000 of Revelation 7, 1-8. That's the army of God, or army of the Lord. And whereas the bride, we see at the end of Revelation, in Revelation 19, it includes the army of God, but it's a huge number. I'm going to say it's several billion people. And it is the firstfruits. It's the gathering of the firstfruits. That's what happens in Revelation 19. And I'm getting ahead of my story, but I'll expand on this in the next episode. But the whole tribulation of 50 years is a fulfillment of the prophecy of the 50-day count in the festival of firstfruits, which is that's what it is. It starts with the Feast of Firstfruits, when the day that Yeshua came out of the grave, Jesus, he was the first of the firstfruits, and then the count of 50 days is a prophecy of the 50 years of the tribulation. And at the end, and the modern Christian world has called this Pentecost, but its correct name is the Feast of Weeks, after a count of 7 weeks. That is 49, and in God's terminology, it actually refers to 50 or 51, because you don't count the 50th year, but it's a prophecy of the whole 50-year tribulation, and at the very end is the great celebration of all the firstfruits. It started with one, who was Yeshua, or Jesus, and it ends up with several billion. And it's really a celebration, even though it came as a result of this great tribulation. So again, the way God looks at things and how we do is very different. Anyway, let's get to the calendar here. So, describing the calendar. The calendar could almost be described as 2 calendars. One is run by the sun, one is run by the moon. And I'll try and avoid my 2 classic mistakes. I will refer to 1 Samuel 20 instead of saying 2 Samuel for whatever reason, and that's 1 Samuel 20. The whole chapter is a story that happens during a 2-day new moon festival. So that's the proof that the new moon festival can be 2 days long. And then it leads to the next step, that the day, quote unquote, that Enoch referred to between the segments, the seasons of the year, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but I'll come back on this. That day can be 24 hours long or 48 hours long. Again, it can refer to what we'd call 2 days, but it's all very self-explanatory and self-evident. It's very easy to follow. And then there's another reference to the day, the long day of Joshua, where Joshua was in a battle and he asked the Lord to stop the sun and the moon so he could finish the battle, and the Lord listened to him. And of course, that was not an accident. God had that all planned. And that was actually the first time he was teaching us about how a day can be 48 hours long. That was the first 48-hour day, or the first example of it in our scriptures. I mean, God used that obviously before, the 2-day principle right from the beginning of time. He established the Jubilee cycles and so on. That's how God operates things. And we're not taught these things in Christianity, and a little more in Judaism, but they understand this better. But everything's done in Jubilees. So when I start talking about the tribulation lasting 50 years, Christians are kind of drawing what is he talking about? Whereas that's how God, everything in his system works in Jubilees. Anyway, back to the calendar. So we got 2 calendars here, so to speak. That's a sense. You'll see what I mean as I describe this. You have to start this whole program with a word study of the Strong's word 4150. And what it means, its correct translation in English, is appointed time. And it's almost always of the Lord, but that's self-evident after you study the word. And the neat thing about word searches and word studies is you don't have to be an expert. You just have to have some common sense and logic, and you can see fairly clearly, quite clearly, what a word means by its use in a sentence. So in this case, if you've never done this before, that's good. Do it for the first time. And the modern tech has made it real easy in my day, in the day when I was young. I'm 64 years old today. This is my 64th birthday. And anyway, now where was I in my thoughts here? Where did I get to my 64th birthday? I was thinking about a whole bunch of stuff this morning, how the things that Jesus would do. Well, he wouldn't get fallen down drunk on his birthday, and he wasn't born on December 25th. And I was just coming up with some funny stuff. What would Jesus do? I know I'm off track here, but I'll come back to this. But Jesus would get circumcised. Jesus would not eat pigs. Jesus would keep every point of the Torah perfectly. Jesus would keep all of his father's festivals. He would keep the Sabbath day. He would keep the new moon festival. And he would not get fallen down drunk on December 25th, because his birthday very likely was the first day of the 7th month. His mother and father came to Jerusalem because they were celebrating the fall festivals, along with all of the sincere believers. They followed God's instructions, and Jesus wants us to follow God's instructions. So these are some of the things that Jesus would do. So he's our example, and we're supposed to do what he did. And anyway, I'm getting down a rabbit trail here. So back to the word 4150. That's where I started back in the day. We just had a big old book called the Strong's Concordance, and if you want to do a word study, you're looking at a lot of hours of work. And in this case, it turned out to be it's used 200 times. And I'm using approximations, but pretty close to 200 times. And I had done most of the study with my old Strongs because, I don't know, Pat wasn't around, my wife Pat. And right near the end of this study, the Lord had stirred me up. I'd kind of left the study sitting on the floor for a year. If you go back to my testimony of learning about all these things in 9, 10, 11, I think it is, in search of the New Moon Festival, Pat was in her desk one morning, and I said, "Hey, Pat, could you look up this word 4150 and hey, could you print it out?" Well, whatever she had at her disposal at that time, she did it and took her 5 minutes. And I had this stack of paper with the word 4150 used 200 times and every scripture printed out in sequence. And what would have taken me 100 hours and had already taken me 50 because I was halfway done, took 5 minutes. So anyway, you have access to this now with modern technology. Get an appropriate word digester, whatever you want to call it, loaded on your phone, and you can do this. Just put in this word and find where it's used and read them all, and it gives you a real good idea what it means. And what you'll find is that 100 of the times it's used, it's referring to the tabernacle in the wilderness. When they were going the 40 years through the desert, they built this tabernacle, and this was the temple, what would become the temple. But in the wilderness, it was something they could assemble and disassemble, and that's where you met God on his appointed times. That's what it means, the tent of the appointed times. Now, the other 100 uses is what we're going to focus on. And what you'll find is it means appointed time. And it's very much like, I've used this example, an appointment with a doctor. If you don't show up at the right time in the right place, you're going to miss it. And in the case of God's appointed times, the focus is more on the time than the place. But there'll come a day when it's very important once the temple's rebuilt and Jerusalem is again the city of God. That'll be very important, and it'll be a focus of the whole world. And people from all nations will send representatives there on every festival. And I should look this up, but there's a scripture in one of the prophets that says during the 1,000 years, any nation that doesn't send a representative to Jerusalem, they will have no rain. They'll have a famine. And they'll smarten up real quick. So it's important now, and it's important in the 1,000 years, and it will be important for all eternity to follow and keep God's festivals. And it was referring to the Feast of Tabernacles in this particular scripture. In fact, I'll look it up and come back with it on my next episode, but I'm going to try and focus on the calendar here. So we're doing this word search of 4150. What we're going to find out, it means appointed times, and it's, except for one use, it's always referring to the appointed times of the Lord. And in that one use, it's just two guys make a decision to meet each other at a certain place and time. But it's emphasizing what this word means. You meet someone, and it's important. I just explained it's important the place eventually, but right now the time is the key thing. The time, not the time and the place so much as right now it's the time. So it'll always be the time, but eventually it'll be important, the time and the place. Right now, you're going to have to follow the voice of the Lord to know where to go, but when, you can figure it out. So we're going to go now to the very first use of this word. It's found in Genesis 1:14, and it says that the Lord put the sun and the moon in the sky to give us signs for all of his appointed times. So in other words, you don't go to the Jewish people to ask them when the festivals are, and you don't go to the Christians to ask them when the festivals are. You look up in the sky and you learn what the signs are, and you can do it yourself. So that's step one. And then now go to Ezekiel 45:17, and you'll find the Lord states very, very clearly that the appointed times, his appointed times, include the Sabbath day, the new moon festival, and the 7 yearly festivals. Those are all his appointed times. So let's start with the Sabbath. So in other words, the Sabbath is not Saturday or Sunday, because neither of those are indicated by a sign from the sun or the moon. So both Christians and Jewish people have it wrong. I'm not saying I got it right, but I got a system I'll explain that works. And that's what we've been doing. Our home church has been doing this for 2 years now. And actually I started 8 years ago when I first started learning about it, but it took 6 of those years to kind of sort it out. I guess it would be going on 10 years ago, actually. It was just my wife and I, and sometimes just me, for the first 6 years. And then our little group of 4 explained it all to them, and they, especially my friend Ron, God kind of taught him a little bit different way, but he could see clearly that, okay, I know we got it wrong, and this makes sense, and now we've been doing it for 2 years, and it feels very comfortable, and it feels right, and it's straightforward and easy and simple and logical, and you can do it yourself. You don't need a go-between, and that's what the Lord wants. He wants a personal relationship with us. So anyway, now back to the calendar. So now we know that the sun and the moon tell us, they give us signs to figure this all out. Well, it turns out you go to the Book of Enoch now, and you can get the Book of Enoch from this book I have been urging you to get, Joseph Lumpkin's The Lost Books of the Bible, Great Rejected Texts. It's an updated version of one I showed a lot of times and turned out you couldn't get it anymore, but he made a new edition, and it includes even more books, but I'm focused on 7. I've read quite a few of the others, and some of them I think are, it's reasonable to assume they could be legitimate, but these 7 I've referred to are what I'll focus on as being important, and I'd start with the Book of Enoch. It's quoted from in, they say 70 quotes in what we call our Bible come from the Book of Enoch, but the most famous one is found in Jude 14, verse 14 of Jude. And now, where am I with my explanation? So in the Book of Enoch, we find that the calendar, the basic calendar with the months on it, is very, very simple. It's made up of 12 months of 30 days each, and they're arranged into 4 segments, which we could call the 4 seasons. And there's 4 resets to the calendar every year. It's exactly on time 4 times a year. It's reset. Whereas our calendar, I think we reset it every 1,000 years or so. We had this extra day in February to bring it sort of back to even keel with the sun's rotation, or its journey, the Earth's journey around the sun. And then sooner or later we've got to make another correction because it's not exact. But Enoch's calendar is that gets reset 4 times a year. And how it's done is you start counting the day after either an equinox or a solstice, and then when you run out of 90, you count these 3 months of 30 days each, and then you wait either the 1 day or the 2 days it takes to get the day past the next equinox or solstice. Very, very, very simple. And simpler yet is finding 6 of the 7 festivals, because 3 of them follow directly after the spring equinox. You start counting the day after the spring equinox, and you find Passover is the 14th, and the days of unleavened bread are the 15th to the 22nd, and then the Feast of Firstfruits. Until we get further knowledge on the whole thing, we're going to pick the day in the midst of the days of unleavened bread, just like Jesus did when he rose. He rose on the Feast of Firstfruits. And then you count your 50 days to the Feast of Weeks, which was misnamed Pentecost. And then for the fall festivals, again, very, very simple. You find the first day of the 7th month. It's the day after the fall equinox. And that first day is the Feast of Trumpets. The 10th day is the Day of Atonement. And the 15th to the 23rd, I might have my math wrong here, because it's an 8-day festival, whereas the Days of Unleavened Bread is a 7-day festival. Anyway, very simple. Now, what do we do with the Sabbath and the new moon festival? Well, I've said this before. It's a kind of a no-brainer that the moon should tell us when the new moon festival is. Turns out the new moon festival is the 1 or 2 days that the moon remains dark after it has given its last sign for the month. And as Enoch explains when he describes the calendars in great detail, when he does the moon one, he says, he makes a strong point that the moon gives a sign every 7 days, 4 in a row. Doesn't say there's Sabbaths, but it's kind of like a no-brainer. It's the only thing left over here. We've covered the 7 yearly festivals, we've covered the new moon festival, and we got the Sabbath left. So that's what we've been doing these 8 years. We watch the moon, and the moon tells us when the first Sabbath is, when it's exact half in the sky, straight up. And then the second Sabbath is the full moon, and the third Sabbath is again the half, but it's seen in the morning at sunrise rather than sunset. And it's the other half in the sky, it's facing the rising sun instead of the setting sun. And then the fourth Sabbath is the day that it disappears. It can be seen with some fancy equipment, but it's so close to the sun that you can't see it with the naked eye anymore. And then on that fourth Sabbath, it disappears, so to speak, and then you have 1 or 2 days before it reappears as a tiny crescent in the western sky. And that period of time of 1 or 2 days is the new moon festival. And it looks forward to and pictures the 8th day of God's kingdom. That is the time of the new heavens and the new earth. So, I will listen to myself, see if I was concise and did a real quick description. You can still go back to the 10 or so episodes where I give lots more details, and beware of my mistakes I kept making. I kept referring to months in connection to the moon, but that's just confusing because the months are given to us by the sun, not the moon. And these are paradigms that we have inherited from our Babylonian systems that we've been immersed in, and both Christians and Jewish people have been immersed in Babylon in a little bit different ways. But the Lord is in the process of unraveling all these things. And the amazing thing, I just learned this last night. It became crystal clear that the tribulation is, for us as humans, is a very, very, very scary time. Read Isaiah 24, and it's like the whole world's wrecked. And we think it's scary because we're finite and physical, but the way God looks at it, he's excited about it because he is going to gather his first fruits during this 50-year tribulation. Right now, he has basically no first fruits. It's kind of like the first fruits in the making. There's these people I've proposed and speculated, like myself, are the spirit of Elijah. We're going ahead to get people thinking in the right direction, get people stirred, annoy them. I know I sound gloom and doom and all this stuff, but it's really, the Lord looks at this as all very exciting, because dying physically isn't death. We don't know better because we've never died and come back. A few have, and I'm going to talk about this more too. One of our newest members to our church, she just read a book, kind of an assemblage, or the author gathered a whole bunch of testimonies from people that have died and come back and told stories, and then you see similarities in their stories, and gives us insights into what we would call heaven or paradise, and more insights into correct theology, let's put it that way. God doesn't give us the whole picture in the scriptures. He gives us a kind of a hazy picture, but he keeps clarifying it, and he does it in all kinds of different ways, including having people die or go to heaven and come back and give us testimonies. Anyway, we'll call this a wrap. I wanted to focus on the calendar, give a quick, concise description of how the calendar works. And please go back on all these 10 or so previous episodes to get some more clarification. Hopefully this would be a real good starting point if I haven't made too many verbal oopses in my description here. So I'll sign off. This is Rock Our World with Neil Buchanan.